a brief statement on the protocol to be followed during this remote meeting. Please note that this meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube, and a recording will be available for public viewing following the meeting. Your microphone should be switched on when invited to speak and switched off when you have finished speaking. Please use the raise hand button to indicate that you wish to speak and lower it when you have finished. Officers should introduce themselves by confirming their name and role before speaking for the first time on any item. Also, can I remind you that members will be allowed 2 questions to officers for each report, and that a follow-up question counts as a second question. I will now ask the clerk to carry out a roll call of the elected members participating in today's meeting.
Thank you, Provost. Councillor Benison?
I am here.
Councillor Benny? Councillor Berrell?
Present.
Councillor Brisley?
Present.
Councillor Davis?
Present.
We've got apologies for Councillor Dodds. Councillor Errol?
Present.
Councillor Farmer?
Present.
Councillor Flanagan?
Present.
Councillor Gibson?
Present.
Councillor Houston?
Present.
Councillor Hutchison?
Present.
Councillor Kane? Councillor Laurie?
Yep, present.
Councillor McPherson?
Here.
Councillor Majuri?
Present.
Councillor MacDonald?
Present.
Councillor McGill?
I'm here.
Councillor Oxborough? Councillor Simpson?
Present.
Councillor Thompson?
Present.
Councillor Tollemache?
Yes, I'm present.
Councillor Tweed?
Present.
Thank you. I'll just run over those members who were not here and for whom we've not got apologies. I suspect Councillor Benny's unable to make it, but Councillor Benny? Councillor Kane?
Apologies for Councillor Kane.
Councillor Roxburgh? No. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? No, I don't see any. We'll move to item 3, which is the Housing Revenue Account Rental Strategy 2022-23. Report by the Chief Officer Housing, Stephen Clark. Stephen.
Thanks, Provost. This report seeks approval for a rent increase for council housing, garage and pitch sites for 2022-23. Page 3 of the report notes that there are cost pressures on the service of £232,000, which require a minimum rent increase of 1.1% to cover them. These costs relate to staff costs, loan charges and the cost of inflation. Page 3 of the report also details the approach to consultation that we took, which involved a special meeting of the Housing Advisory Group, followed by a newsletter going out to all tenants asking them their views on a 1.1, 1.5 or 1.7% rent increase. It was also explained to tenants that a higher rent increase would facilitate an increased budget for spending on solar panels and solar battery storage. Page 3 notes we received 371 responses, with a total of 66% of respondents supporting a 1.1% increase, 23% supporting a 1.5% increase, and 11% favouring a 1.7% increase. More details on the consultation responses are contained in Appendix 1 of the report. Page 4 of the report notes that the average council house rent in Scotland for the current year is £77.83. That's per week. And even with a 1.1% increase, Stirling Council's average rent will remain among the very lowest in Scotland. So in terms of recommendations, Council is asked to approve an increase of 1.1% for house rents in 22-23, with the same increase being applied for garage and pitch sites. Council is also asked to approve the Housing Revenue Account budget for 2022-23 as detailed in Appendix 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions to the officer? Councillor Houston.
Thank you, Provost. Mr. Clark, thank you for the report and the introduction. I just wanted to get your professional view that you know, looking at, even with the proposed increase, that Stirling Council has the lowest rent in Scotland. Looking at the list coming in, but if the proposed increase goes through, it's £70.85. I think the next one is Perth and Kinross at 71.47, followed by Falkirk at 71.87, and it goes away up to what is in Edinburgh at £102. Is that sustainable over the longer term if we're going to keep our housing stock at the level that we would all want it to be, so that we can offer good accommodation to our council tenants and make the proper investment to keep both the properties up, but also to be able to build new houses, as we have done very successfully here in Dunblane? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Houston. I think actually that we're the second lowest council rents in Scotland. I think Moray Council is just slightly less than our rents, and it would remain the second lowest in Scotland unless there was a rent decrease from another council, which I think is very unlikely. So our rents are the second lowest in Scotland. I think that our rent increases are most influenced really by salary changes, so in terms of the percentage increase in terms of cost of living that is applied every year, if there was no increase applied in a year, there probably would be less cause for a significant rent increase. But if there was a high percentage rent increase going forward, that would necessitate us to increase our rents as well to cover the additional salary costs. In terms of going forward, I think we're in a good position in terms of having that low rent increase. If there was significant further investment we wish to do, that could necessitate higher rent increases going forward, depending if we, for example, chose a very high option in terms of future housing development. We're actually going to be working with external consultants to review our rent model and our level of debt, to consider if that's sustainable and the sort of level of debt in terms of further borrowing that we could incur, and to give us an indication of the sort of level of new build investment. There are a few other things in our favour, though. One of the things in our favour is that we have the feed-in tariff for the solar panels that we fitted for many years, and we receive around about £750,000 a year, which comes into the HRA and subsidises the HRA every year, and that's an advantage that we have over many councils in Scotland.
Provost, there will be just a supplementary to that. I was just going to ask, given the increase in material costs that everybody's experienced in the construction industry, etc., are you content that these levels will help you cover those costs?
I mean, in terms of the new build side of things, construction costs have increased significantly, but we still have an ambitious programme set out in the coming years for new build development. At the same time, there's also a significant increase in the availability of grant from the Scottish Government. The level of grant is increased from a minimum of about £57,000 a house up to now probably mid-70s, but we can probably make justification for higher levels of grant than that. So that in some respects cancels out the increased construction costs. But it is something that we'll have to monitor going forward, because there has been a significant increase in construction costs in the last 18 months, or really since the beginning of the pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Stephen, I'm just a bit concerned that the basis for this increase is on a survey which had less than 7% response, which is even lower than the survey we had last year of 9%. And clearly, if you ask people for three painful options, they're going to opt for the least painful. But given the inflationary pressures that Councillor Houston has referred to, I think the basis for choosing this option on results of a very limited survey is not very robust. What do you think about that?
I think it's disappointing that we've had quite a low level of response this year, and it has been lower than previous years. I think going forward, we'll have to look at other ways we can engage with our tenants to try and increase that level of response. One thing it could be is that the sort of range of options are quite limited, between 1.1 and 1.7%. It's quite a narrow range. If there'd been higher rent increase options, that might have compelled more tenants to make a response to, to voice a concern about a significant level of increase. But we are a bit disappointed with the level of response. However, we undertook this consultation beginning of November to, just towards the end of December. It could have been a lot of people were more concerned about the situation with coronavirus at that point. It may have been putting off people or just basically reducing people's interest in being engaged with that. But it is a concern that we would like to see a higher response going forward. That we might want to decide to have a text line or something like that to give people the ability to respond that way. The difficulty is, though, the more open and the more accessible you make it for voting, the more the less robust that we can be about that these are actual our tenants or it's just anyone responding to the surveys. That's a risk about having various methods of communication. But all tenants received a paper survey, and we're also provided with the ability to provide online responses as well.
Yeah, I just follow up on that. I mean, given that gas and electricity prices are going to be rising sharply, it's disappointing, as Councillor Houston referred to, that the option was being recommended. It gives a minimum increase in PV panels and renewable heating options. So we're not really going to give the most flexibility to people to minimise their fuel bills in an environment which is going to be extremely painful going forward, because we know the inflation is 5% and oil and gas prices are going up. And gas prices are up 5 times because of policies of, which to me seemed after closing perfectly good power stations and were forcing us to rely on gas at world prices.
I think there is
a question. Is that a question?
Yeah, well, the question is it we're not constraining ourselves and not giving the people the most option of reducing fuel bills by going for the increase of 1.1 and not 1.7%.
I think it's a difficult one for us to do because we obviously want to install as much renewables as we can, but it was one way of reducing our borrowing costs to reduce that level of investment. I didn't, we certainly didn't want to propose reductions in investment for any of the other parts of the capital programme, kitchens, bathrooms, windows and so on, because it hasn't been a significant investment as we'd like in the stock in the last year because of difficulties in the supply chain or restrictions going on in terms of working in people's houses. So it was one area that we could try and bring it down a little bit. But I do take the point that we want to fit as much renewables. But it must be said that our stock is among the most energy efficient in Scotland at the moment. But obviously there's more we can be doing. There is still provision in the budget for a significant number of solar panels and battery storage into the stock.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Provost. Actually, I can see the rationale for going for 1.1 cost of living crisis and all these kind of issues. I think it's great that we can do that. However, I do wonder why we didn't have 1.25%, and if having this low increase this year might mean that next year we have to do something crazy like 3%. Can you reassure people that that's not the case?
Thanks for your question, Councillor MacDonald. I certainly hope that's not the case to see a significant rent increase. As I mentioned earlier, though, that our salary costs are very sensitive, in terms of what we have to do with our rents going forward. Obviously, there's significant inflationary pressures at the moment, so that could result in higher rent increases in the future. But we'll be doing our best to look at efficiency savings where we can, to always try and deliver the most cost-effective, the lowest rent increase we could possibly deliver, because it's obviously important to our tenants in terms of value for money.
Just a final question. I noticed on the survey there were some people that, well, they don't really like the housing service and very, very unsatisfied. Can we pick up from that whatever those issues are? Because they've clearly got something that they're not happy about, and has that been addressed?
Yeah, as part of the survey, as part of the consultation, there is a sort of free text area to express your views and opinions or anything that is just causing dissatisfaction issues. Often they relate to outstanding repairs or concern about something that not be done in their community, etc. What we do with every response we get, if we have a name and address for it, we'll contact that person to try and remedy their concern. So going forward, they're more satisfied that we've listened to what their concern has been. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Errol.
Thanks, Provost. That's just to follow up on Councillor Davis's question about the consultation responses. Stephen, I just wonder if you could talk a bit more about the wider context of that survey, because my understanding is that across different social landlords and other local authorities, responses have been down. That our lower level of response is not in any way out of kilter with what's been happening generally.
Yeah, my colleague Gillian Finlay, who's on the call, might want to pick up on that. She was involved in the working up the newsletter and aware of what the consultation's been going on across the country. Gillian, could you maybe speak to that briefly, please?
Yes, please come in, Gillian.
Hi, Gillian Finlay, Service Manager acting at present. Councillor Errol, you're quite right. When speaking to the sector, we're hearing that the response levels are much lower across the board, and that way we are really thinking, is it a timing issue? Obviously, we're all limited with the timescales that we can carry out our consultations. Unfortunately, ours is always around the Christmas time, so that does have an impact. But across the board, we have heard that the response rates are low, particularly when the options on offer are lower. I think speaking to one of the housing associations whose options were much higher, they got a higher response rate. So I think, as Stephen has commented, it might be that our options are just so they're very low and they're quite together. That's not as if there's major differences in the options that we're seeing across that.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Tolmash.
Yes, to me, Provost. Stephen, can you assure us that even with the slightly reduction in the energy efficiency that you're able to do, that Stirling Council is still on schedule for doing what it had committed to do, and that it is in relation to what is happening as across Scotland?
Okay, thank you for your question, Councillor Tolmash. My colleague Gregor Whiteman's on the call, and obviously he's very knowledgeable about what we're doing in terms of renewables, so he might be better placed to speak in more detail for you. If you could come in, please, Gregor.
Gregor, can you come in, and can you say your job title, please?
Yes, Gregor Whiteman, Property and Private Sector Housing Manager. Councillor Tolmash, the 1.1% option that's being recommended by officers would allow us to invest £900,000 in renewables in the capital programme next year. That will deliver around about 137 installations of a mix of both PV only and PV and solar storage to around 137 units. That's really principally to address the needs of the new build programme that will be ongoing in 2022-23 and around about 95 existing council properties that we're going to target that are in mixed tenure blocks to take advantage of Scottish Government grant funding through what's called the Heat Tabs programme, whereby we can secure the consent of the owners in the mixed tenure blocks and offer them a free PV system in order that our tenants, who up until now have been unable to benefit from PV in these mixed tenure blocks because the roof is communal and therefore part owned by owners as well. So yeah, it will help achieve around about 95 installs to existing stock and around about 42 new build properties that will be under construction or nearing completion during the next financial year.
Okay, thank you, Gregor. And does that mean that we compare with what else is going on in Scotland? If you compare the Stirling Council to that?
Okay, so in terms of the new standard that all social landlords in Scotland are working towards, it's what's known as the Energy Efficiency Standard for Social Housing 2032. whereby all social landlords have to take measures to bring all their stock, where reasonably possible, up to an energy performance certificate rating of B for Bobby. So as at the returns last year from all social landlords, the average pass rate across Scotland was 6% of the social rented stock, whereas in Stirling Council, just over 60% of our stock now meets that new target that's to be met by 2032. So we're well ahead of everyone else, but obviously we're keen to try and deliver that minimum level to as many tenants as possible. And we're looking at other options, including underfloor insulation wherever possible now as part of our voids process, and where tenants voluntarily ask, can you do anything to my property to minimise heat loss? And if they're willing to have hatches cut in their floor, and the solum underneath is deep enough that we can get a contractor in underneath the floor and insulate it, we'll do that as well.
Thank you. Still on questions, Councillor Farmer.
Yeah, just to go back to the questionnaire, it's certainly good to hear that we're actually looking at how we can continually improve the consultation as an iterative process. But having spoken to a statistician in the council recently, and given we're talking about roughly, Stephen, about 6,000 properties, that the estimated response rates for questionnaires are usually quite low, but between 7% and the 9%, that is not particularly that low for typical questionnaires, and that it would be regarded as statistically valid in terms of being a representative sample of tenants' views. So it's just to give, I think it's important that if that could be confirmed, that would give elected members the assurance that the information that they're given from the questionnaire is representative and is a valid representative sample.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Farmer. We'd probably somebody would have to come to provide out with this meeting in terms of the confidence interval in relation to this. However, we do our tenant satisfaction survey as well, and I feel like the number of responses we get for the tenant satisfaction survey is not a dissimilar response. I don't know, Gillian Finlay, if you can recall what it was for the tenant satisfaction survey, because that is worked out as being a certain number in order that it's considered to be statistically robust. Gillian, are you able to respond to that?
Yes,
Gillian, come in, please.
Yep. Gillian Findlay is Service Manager Acting. Councillor Farmer, just in response to that, when we do our independent satisfaction survey, we target around 900 and the response, and that's done from an independent point of view. That's a cross section across the whole council areas, and it's split, it's fully split in that way downwards, and so that's where it comes from, the independence. With obviously the annual rent consultation, yes, it's sent to all tenants, but in terms of the split, I couldn't tell you, where the main concentration is coming from. We can do some analysis, obviously, of the responses, but I don't have that to hand at present.
Okay, it just basically in terms of the actual number compared to the tenants, that would generally be regarded as a statistically valid sample, is really what I was getting at, to give members that assurance that it is a meaningful survey, if you like.
Gillian?
Yes, of course, absolutely, Councillor Farmer. As I said, the year before, I was just checking there, we had 9.3%, but we have had 5% before, when I was looking back at the years. So yes, it is difficult. And I was looking at some approaches to, we did make a lot of changes to the consultation document this year, and that was well received. But we're also thinking of maybe some sort of a personalised invitation, to frontline it, maybe with, when you send it out to a tenant, have names, personalise it more. Maybe if there's something we can do in that way. And also, as ever, the incentives for filling out, consultations, we have £2 times £50 vouchers. Is that something we can look at to incentivise it in the future? So there are things that we're looking at, and we're continually trying to make it more user friendly. Obviously, this year, as I say, we made a lot of changes to the document that seemed to be well received, so we will take that forward.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? I see none. I believe that Councillor Thompson has a motion. Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, thanks, Provost. But first of all, what I would like to do is thank our housing officers and the support staff for all the hard work over the past 12 months. Despite COVID, we've managed to provide a lot of support for our tenants with financial advice and so on. We've provided new homes in St Ninians, Dunblane, Ratloch, and pretty soon 22 in Cowie should be coming to let within the next few months. Provided money this year for aids and adaptations, kitchens, bathrooms, etc. But we'd love to do more. But coming back to the point that was raised, I think the Chief Officer for Housing raised the point that we do consult with our tenants through the Housing Advisory Group. And we did look at a range. We did look at 0%. We did look at 3-4%. But through those discussions, we decided it probably best to limit it to a narrow range that was both affordable in our perception and gave the maximum return for our bucks. On that basis, we went out to consult on the three options. I would like to thank Gillian for the open door report. I think it was fantastic. He gave lots of useful information there to our tenants. And on the back of that, the tenants came back and said 1.1%. So it's on that basis I'd like to approve the officer recommendations 1 to 3 on page 1 of the report.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
I'll second that, Provost.
Do you wish to speak, Councillor Gibson?
I'll reserve my right, thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from anyone else? Councillor Errol.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, no, we believe that this is a sensible course to steer on this. As Jim has said, there was good discussions at the Housing Advisory Group. I think that covered a range of options as has been described. And I think in the context of where we are in the wider circumstances and the economy, I think 1.1 is a very sensible course for us to have taken, and I'm assuming that it's going to get agreement across the chamber on this. And I would like to also just thank the officers, as Jim has done, for their efforts, especially in a particularly difficult year, to continue with the service they provide on a number of areas. I mean, it's been hard work, so it's an opportunity to say thank you to them, as Jim has said. So yes, we're happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Yes, okay, I would also like to thank all the officers for all the work they've done, and especially again to repeat all the work we've done to make our houses in Stirling the energy efficient, and I think we should congratulate the officers on the work they've done over the last few years. And this was discussed in the HAG, so I'd like to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, just very briefly, Provost. Yeah, I think everyone wants to thank the officers. I want to thank the tenants as well. The tenants are happy. They've got a good service here. That is I think they get value for money, and I think the tenants, I think the only thing I would say to Gillian, it's not really a question as such as they couldn't get these open door events again in the Albert Halls. These were used to be well attended, where tenants would come along and communicate with officers. So the quicker we can get back to normal, that the better. But yeah, thank officers for the great work, but also not forget to thank our tenants, who I think they get a good service out the council, to be honest with you, and it's recognised in this, in the consultation responses. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an important point. Any further comments? No, I don't see any. Councillor Gibson, you reserve the right to speak. Do you wish to say anything?
I would just endorse all that's been said by others as well. Yeah, just to add my endorsement to all that's been said by my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I take it that we all approve the recommendations?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much. Move to item 4, Housing Capital Investment Programme 2022-23. Again, Stephen Clark.
Thank you, Provost. This report details the investment plans for 22-23 in terms of improving the condition and quality of homes, the energy efficiency of homes, and investment in increasing our new homes by building or by purchases. Section 2 of the report notes that our planned level of borrowing for next year is just under £4.3 million, which is a significant reduction from the current year, and we anticipate receiving £6 million in Scottish Government grants, which will support 70 new homes. The total planned expenditure for the year will be £18.3 million. Appendix 1 to the report provides a breakdown of our investment plan for things like kitchens, bathrooms, windows, roofing, and so on. So in terms of recommendations, Council will be asked to approve the 2022-23 capital investment programme as detailed in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the officer? Councillor MacDonald.
Just a quick question. With the costs of materials and all that stuff rising, have you got some flexibility in this investment programme to cover that, or we have to cut things? How's that going to work?
I'll maybe ask my colleague Stephen Swan to speak to this one a little bit. We've been doing recent procurement, so I think we feel we're up to date with the figures as they are at the moment. But Stephen can maybe provide a bit more detail on some of the capital investment.
Stephen Swan, are you in the meeting?
Thank you, Provost.
Can you say your job title, please?
Yeah, Stephen Swan, Service Manager for Housing, Property and Asset Management. Yes, Councillor MacDonald, appreciate there is rising material cost, supply chain issues and demand. In terms of the budget, we wouldn't look to be having that put under pressure. What may happen is as opposed to doing 200 kitchens, we may only get 192 if there is a slight creepage in material cost. So that's how we'll manage it. Obviously, we're kind of coming out of the COVID pandemic, but we're not clear of the woods as yet. So it may be a case that the actual amount that we can achieve is less than what we're planning, but we're certainly planning to do that full amount as of we are at the moment. But it will be a very much suck it and see as we move forward. Thank you.
I think that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Earl.
Thanks, Provost. Just a question on page 21, 2.6.4 under the central heating. Details what the budget will be used for, and it talks about replacing obsolete central heating systems where replacement systems were previously refused by the tenant. I just wondered if you could give some idea of the scale of that, where people have actually refused to have a heating system upgraded, and I'm assuming that in the current environment there's a lot of work going into persuading people of how much that is a very good idea to have that work done.
Thank you for your question. This can happen for a number of reasons. My colleague Gregor Whiteman might be able to go into a bit of detail as to those sort of reasons and what we've been doing to engage with tenants that have maybe refused significant work such as central heating in the property. Gregor?
Gregor, would you like to come in?
Yes, Gregor Whiteman, Property and Private Sector Housing Manager. Councillor Earl, just as background, we have to put in an annual return to the housing regulator on our performance in terms of energy efficiency standard compliance. And when we get that validated by an external advisor, she is very strict on where we claim exemptions that a property failed because a tenant has previously refused an energy efficiency upgrade, such as heating. And she likes to see that validated, that on an annual basis we continue to write letters out to those tenants to try and persuade them to take up the option of the efficient heating system. So we do still have a small number of tenants that still have the old gas-backed boilers. Now they really are coming at the end of their life, and shortly, if there's a failure, our gas engineers will not be able to get hold of parts for those boilers. Likewise, those properties in off-gas areas that have the old-fashioned storage heaters, again, we've tried to persuade them to agree to replace them with the modern, efficient version, which is dead straightforward, taking out a heater, putting a new heater back in. They've got adjustable legs, so they fall straight into the little slots in the carpet, so that there's no decoration of carpeting issues. But for whatever reason, there are still some tenants that are quite happy with what they've got, and potentially don't want the upheaval. But as we start coming out of COVID pandemic, you know, we are hoping that we'll be able to engage, and more tenants will be up for getting those properties upgraded, because just now they are showing as a fail for the energy efficiency standard, albeit we're getting an exemption on it because it's been something that the tenants refused. But also, obviously, in light of energy costs going up, we hope that maybe some of those tenants will reconsider and seek our help and ask, you know, can they be slotted in to next year's programme, you know, to have the upgraded heating systems installed.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Just a follow-up, Provost, if that's okay. What we can only seek, well, we can seek to persuade and inform everything. I mean, where do we get to the point when? Is there anything more we can do? Because it's almost an act of self-harm, quite frankly, not to get these systems put in place, or financial self-harm not to do this. I mean, how robust can we be to get these much more efficient systems in place?
It's really down to persuasion, and it can be housing officer engagement, it can be income maximisation officers if they're in touch with those tenants, and if that highlights that the tenant would benefit, you know, we try and work with the tenant to persuade them, because sometimes it's the thought of the upheaval, and then they can be persuaded when our technical officers visit to explain what's involved. We can arrange to maybe temporarily move the tenant out for the day into a relative's home, you know, so they're not having to live through the disruption of any floorboards being lifted. The only option we would have would be in the event of a failure where, for example, with a gas boiler, if our engineers have to shut it down because it's not safe, then that's when it comes in that we can really have to say we have to make this upgrade. But as with kitchens, bathrooms, we do get a small number of tenants that refuse those upgrades as and when they're planned.
Okay. All right, well, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Houston.
Thank you, Provost. It's on page 23, new house building 2.9.4, Jury's Hill Phase 1. Development of the site is expected to commence in 2022-23 with delivery of approximately 25 new houses. How confident are you about that figure? And if it doesn't transpire, is there another list of another site to go to so that we can make sure that we keep up the allocation of houses that we intend to build? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Houston. You may recall that we had the Environment and Housing Committee earlier this month, and there was a number of new build sites going up there. We are in discussion with Springfield regarding Jury's Hill, so and that's quite recent discussion that we're having, so I'm reasonably confident about it, but we are pursuing a further site that we could take forward in the short term, because we obviously want to see a continued investment in new supply and affordable housing, and recognise that, you know, all private sector sites, you know, the timescale can change at relatively short notice there, but we are engaging with Springfield, among other developers, to keep our supply going. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Provost. Yeah, on page 20, Stephen, item 2.2, the borrowing is going to reduce from last year from a decrease of £6.45 million. Is that because of capacity constraints, or is it because of lack of financial availability? Because presumably demand for housing is still, well, I know the demand for housing is still very high, and I'm just wondering why we're not maximising the facilities.
I think it's safe to say that this current year has been a very, very high level of borrowing, an unusually high level of borrowing, because we've had a number of sites completing. The other thing to bear in mind is that on new build sites, we tend to receive the Scottish Government grant funding up, at the beginning, at the early stages of construction. And most of the sites that we've got completing now, we've already received the grant funding for. So in the second year, you tend to have to borrow more of your own money, whereas in the first year, a lot of that development funding is funded directly from the Scottish Government grant funding. So that's the main reason. It's been a significant year in terms of units. We're looking at about investment of about 160 units, I think. So that's almost a 3% increase in council housing stock. It's not significant next year, but it's still a number of sites in a number of areas. I would say that the sort of level of borrowing we're looking at this year is more normal. I don't think we could sustain a level of borrowing that we're doing in our current year every single year without having an impact in terms of debt levels. However, we're going to speak to an external consultant to work on what's a realistic level that we can aim for that's not going to burden our tenants in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, just a quick question. On page 22, garage refurbishment. This figure seems a bit arbitrary. £5,000, is that for demolishing and fixing? I mean, can you explain that a little bit? It just seems like a strange figure for what you're talking about there.
It is quite a small figure there. Gillian Finlay can maybe speak to that. It may be that if we're looking at more significant regeneration in the area, there would be a significant budget there in terms of demolition or renewing a garage site. I think this is generally for one-off making goods on a specific site. Gillian Finlay, maybe you want to speak to that briefly?
Thank you, Gillian. Would you come in, please?
Sure, Gillian Finlay, Service Manager acting. Yep, just to come in on that, yes, it is. It's for minor repairs or like the one-off garage roof repairs, so that budget has been consistent at 5,000 for a long time. And I know that Stephen has intimated that there might be some further budget for some development work in the area. So it's just to do with any repairs that come up on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have another question, Councillor MacDonald?
No, that was it. That covers it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? There being none, Councillor Thompson has a motion. Councillor Thompson.
Okay, thank you, Provost. I'll be brief. I think we've given this a good hearing. The two key things for me personally are what we're doing with fuel poverty, insulation, solar panels, etc., and the fact that we continue to build houses, new homes for people. So on that basis, quite happy to recommend on page 19 the recommendation to approve the capital budget.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Seconded, Provost.
Councillor Gibson seconds. Councillor Gibson, do you wish to speak?
I'll reserve my right just now, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any comments? Councillor Errol.
Yes, just briefly, Provost, I'd just like to, we again will support this. Clearly, it's a good programme, and again, the officers have worked hard to deliver this programme and the investment programme with the new builds as well, which, in these circumstances, seeing that continue and expand is to be welcomed, and it's a testament to the effort that's been put into that. So we're very happy to back and support this capital programme.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Yeah, I think, again, thanks to the officers. I think there's been a great deal of work going on, and between this year's and next year's, there'll be 200 odd units that I'm delighted to say that an SNP-led administration is leading, and well done to the Scottish Government for providing the funding as well. We shouldn't miss that out, because look at the 6.0 million on 2.8 at page 23. It's brilliant, and these houses would never get our life changers. These houses are for people with needs, complex needs and such like. So they're absolute life changers, and I think well done to Stephen Clark especially, who picked up, there was slippage in previous years delivering houses. I think Stephen Clark and his might deserve great credit for this, and obviously the politicians for driving the agenda forward, but I think all in all it's a good news story.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Gibson, do you wish to come in?
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, almost endorse all of what was said by my colleagues previously, but we'll try and aim for unanimity and disregard the last praise for the Scottish Government. Perhaps we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I sense that we are in agreement on approving the recommendations. Is that the case?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. And I would like to reiterate our thanks to officers for all the hard work that underpins these reports. And that concludes our business. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Provost.
Thank you.